Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about player hoarding. Mr. Awesome 5211 asks, what suggestions would you have regarding player hoarding when it comes to items and skills throughout the game? That's a good question. And I know, you everyone's had the experience where they end a game and they have 1,000 heal potions or that one scroll of doom that you were waiting for just the right moment to use, or you had a heal entire party spell that you never cast because you never came across a point where everyone in the party was hurt. Everybody hoards. Every game I think I've ever played, I've hoarded something, and there are some people who just can't stop hoarding. It's what they do, and some of those people even like hoarding. I don't think all of them do. I think some people hoard and they wish they didn't, but they hoard anyway. But I think what we can do is look at game design to encourage players not to do that. And I think we got to look at two different things. You talk about items and skills, and I'm going to assume for skills you meant hoarding as in not using them because they had a limit on how often you could use them, and so you saved it until a perfect moment. So let's talk about items first, because I think that's easier to comprehend and easier to talk about and happens in every game. I think games that drop things that are usable make people want to wait for the perfect time to use them. I've mentioned this before, but Breath of the Wild solved this issue by their weapons decayed with use and eventually break, and then you just had to use another one. This is a way that forced you to just keep getting more weapons and be glad you got more weapons and lose the ones that broke. A lot of games have encumbrance. Most of my games use this. There's a reason for encumbrance. It makes the player drop things. It makes them keep what they think is usable and throw out the rest. A lot of people don't like encumbrance. They find it too restrictive. But every time we've experimented with the idea of getting rid of encumbrance, we just shift the problem to another part of the game, which is inventory. If people can get a lot of things, they then complain that they have a lot of things and that they can't get through their inventory. So then we try to make tabs with an inventory for all the different types of things. But inevitably, the things in one of those tabs, one or more, will fill up, and then they complain about all the things under my junk tab or all the things under my consumables tab. So you still end up having a problem, and I think encumbrance helps solve that, as much as some people don't like it. But some other ideas would be to make it... You're trying to solve the problem of people have something that they don't feel like they should use. You could make it so instead of it's things you pick up, here's an item that has charges, and the charges somehow get restored. For example, let's say instead of picking up heal potions, you just have a magic flask that when you dip in a magic fountain, fills up with 5 charges of heal. You know you can always go back to that fountain and fill it back up. This lets the designer place these fountains at regular enough intervals that people feel like they don't have to run too far to get to a fountain. But in the middle of combat, you probably can't run off to the fountain. In some boss combats, maybe gates or something prevent you from even leaving the arena. So there's no hoarding in the sense of you don't feel like you have to save those heal potions for a particular combat. But once a combat starts, you know you only have no more than, say, 3 or 5 charges. It also is easier for the designer then to design a combat, knowing that there's a limit on how many of these things will be available. I think other ways you can do this, which factor into other game mechanics people want to do, is maybe your magic heal flasks completely refills when you sleep. But sleeping costs time and money. So time passes, and there's a certain amount of money involved in sleeping. Either you have to rent a room or a bed, or you have to camp, and it uses camping supplies. You've all seen this in different games. The idea is sleeping is a time and money sink, which is really important for many games to have both of those. So you often find yourself going, well, I still have a couple charges left on this. I'll keep going, rather than have that time and money sink happen. And then lastly, and you've seen this in other games, found items can go into special places. Maybe If it's junk, it just goes into a junk bag. That doesn't count against your encumbrance, and when you go to town, it automatically gets sold. So you can think of junk items as money. They're effectively found money. If you played Pillars, we had something called a stash. And the stash was something that you could put things into it, but you could only take out the last thing you put in. The idea for a stash, and that way you had to play if you wanted to get into it. The idea for a stash was throw things in the stash, don't worry about the stash. When you get to town, you can review what's in your stash, sell what's in your stash. This lets people leave nothing behind, but they have to review it later. It's like kind of gone, or it's not really something for them to use as an active inventory. So these are a lot of ways you can deal with items. So let's talk a little bit about skills. There's always going to be that problem where you give someone a really powerful, like you have a big fireball or a death spell or a heal everybody spell. And you feel like, well, I don't want to use this unless I'm being attacked by something powerful or a lot of things or everybody in the party's hurt. That makes sense. Otherwise, I'll do individual heals. There's a lot of ways you can get around feeling like people need to hoard those uses of their skills. For example, you may have a skill set up so that there's a lot of free ones that do a small amount of damage that build up to the use of a big one. You see this in a lot of games. A lot of melee attacks that build up to a big finish, or the way we did monks, they do their little attacks, they let themselves get hurt, they build up those wounds, and then they power their big attacks with the wounds. Those are ways of telling players, you have these big abilities, but you're going to have to wait to use them. But when you can use them, you might as well use them because you're still building up to use them again. So you almost want to use them so that you can start rebuilding a second use. So you can use them 2, 3, 4 times in a combat. You can also have spells that use mana. And therefore you don't hoard individual spells. Yeah, now people kind of hoard mana, but you could have a mana potion with charges like that heal potion. So they don't think of mana as something that they always have to conserve super carefully because it can be renewed to a limit. And that way designers can still plan for this is how many times you can renew mana in one particular combat. Pillars use something that I really liked, which was refreshing skills and spells during combat. There were skills you could use frequently. You'd use them and then they'd cool down and you could use them again. There were skills that refreshed after every combat. So you had this skill and you knew you could only use it once, but you got to use it in this combat, so you probably did use it every combat. Then there were ones that refreshed every day or every sleep period. Again, the sleep period here can cost time and money. So this stuff works if the designer is thinking of what the money sink and time sink is going to cost the player. Now, there's a lot more you can do. In fact, what I do is I encourage designers and anybody working on the game to brainstorm methods that make sense for your game, that exist in mechanics that encourage the use of these abilities. And that's something that I kind of want to say, that's kind of the moral of this entire talk. When you're designing, many people feel like they need to design against a behavior. Like people are hoarding. How can I stop them? The real question is, why aren't they using? You want to design to encourage a behavior. If you want players to use abilities, give them a reason they want to use it. And that's counter to that overriding reason of I better save it for a better time. If it's an ability you get to use in every combat, they're great. They're probably using it in every combat, especially near the end of a combat. They're like, oh, there's one guy left. I'll do the big damage spell against him. The faster I get him down, the better. If you have a spell that's usable once a day and you have an encounter when going back to town, you might as well use that spell because you're about to go into town and reset all your abilities. So that's what I've always encouraged designers to think about. There's a strong desire to thwart players, but that comes across in your game and in your design. What you really want to do is reward somehow, encourage somehow a player to play the game the way that you want them to. And then they'll play that way because it's in their best interest, but you've designed for it to be played that way, so you enjoy them doing that. it's kind of, I know that feels a little backwards that, hey, shouldn't I just make the game out there and let people play how they want? Yeah, you should always let people play how they want. But if there's a certain way you want them to play, rewarding them to play that way is very good. It's what I used to say about evil players. You can be evil, but the game will have reactions against that. And you're going to have to live with it. That was your choice. And you shouldn't be surprised that, you slaughter everybody in one town and then people in the next town don't like you. So always design towards encouraging the behaviors from the players you want, and then you can get the results you want. So encourage people to use their items and use their spells and skills, and they'll do so. And they won't feel like they're being railroaded, but they also will feel like, hey, I got to use those things, and I'm going to get to use them again. And it's win-win for everybody. Other than that, I don't really have anything to say about hoarding. Some people love hoarding stuff. I've seen the Skyrim homes that are full of cheese. If that's the way you want to play, more power to you. I just think the game should be designed with encouraging certain kinds of behaviors. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Awesome 5211.